I now benight you, King Dratnos of the World of Warcraft Community Council. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I did actually sign up, but I don't think they should let me in, but we'll talk more about that later.
Yes. So there's been actually a decent number of like abstract outside of game things that have occurred this week that are definitely going to impact the direction of the game. And it has come as a surprise that Ian Hazzikostas did an interview with VentureBeat. There were also, like we said earlier, we're going to talk about the community council. I think the first thing to cover is the VentureBeat Ian Hazzikostas interview. And at the very top of this Wowhead article that gives a really good summary, he talks about cross-faction rating, which is something that, I mean, I know that you and I have both really hoped that cross-faction just gameplay in general would be more profound, right?
Yeah, this actually came fairly late in the VentureBeat interview, but I think it's cool that they put it at the top here because I kind of agree that this is one of the biggest pieces of new information, which is Ian in this interview effectively giving the talking points that people make in favor of cross-faction rating, right? If Jaina and Thrall can team up, why can't we? And also, if people want to play Alliance and also want to raid high end and live in North America, right? You can kind of only pick two of those three right now.
Yeah, and I think that more than anything, it just kind of sucks because you really, not you, but like broadly, people wanted to play like these racials, whether it be for aesthetic, whether it be for just like racial power, whether it be for just having just like just something that's a little bit new to them. And if you wanted to check those boxes, like you were saying, you were very limited in what you could decide on, and a lot of times it just ended up with you being Horde. I know for a long time I like the purple Moonkin form. I also think that Night Elf racial is very strong and would not mind being a Night Elf at some points. But I'm going to stay on Horde because all of my friends play on Horde, and I feel like it's just. I mean, we've talked about. I think we've made one of these videos talking about like the faction balance.
We did,
issues.
Yeah, it was one of our first.
Yeah, and ultimately, it was the exact same thing that we came to a conclusion there. It's not going to fix itself faction balance-wise. I think that this cross-faction rating and cross-faction gameplay is probably the best solution that doesn't impede on the playability of the game, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, I think in particular, like, the Blizzard has this decision already. They made this for PvP, right? Where it's like, okay, we're having people queue for RBGs, but we need to make the gameplay work, and we're having a bunch of Horde people queue. And the solution they came up with was like, all right, we can sacrifice the full faction fantasy here, and you can queue up for an RBG as a Horde player and show up as a Night Elf in the Alliance base of Twin Peaks or whatever, right? And that's something that I think was a really good choice to make it so that the game was more playable at the expense of like the faction divide being as solid of a wall as it used to be. And I think they should make similar choices for PvE where it will allow people to be a Night Elf, play as a Night Elf for the rest of the game, hang out in Teldrassil, and then still raid with a guild of people that includes Horde players.
And I think the playability versus fantasy issue that's occurred for a lot of things throughout WoW's history is definitely something that was covered heavily. And it wasn't just about the cross-faction rating. So the next thing is talking about covenant swapping and evolving developer philosophies, which is, I mean, so the cross-faction rating is just like part of it, right? It's just like a change in the philosophy, at least from what was said here. Ian directly says it's a reflection of us changing a lot of those underlying philosophies that have motivated our approach to designing WoW. A lot of these things, like I mentioned, regarding conduit energy are outgrowths of lessons that we were taught by our predecessors. Okay, the rest of that doesn't really matter. But like to the point, it's like what he's directly talking about is the ability to be able to play the game at like because WoW is just like an end game content kind of game. And so there was a lot of things that over time that were sacrificing playability for this fantasy, this MMORPG kind of thing. And they said that they are looking to make the game more playable and less grindy.
I don't know. I have a little bit of a different take on what they're doing here.
Okay.
Which it's like, covenant swapping, people put this as like are you making the choice for your end game or are you making like a fantasy choice, right? But the way that they designed it, this expansion, they sort of hogtied the two together, right? And so if you're a player that 90% of your experience in the game is based on, playing some character that you connect with and doing some stories and being in a faction you like, being in a covenant you like, and 10% of the game you like is doing heroic or mythic raiding, you were forced this expansion to basically sacrifice that 90% of what you wanted to play the game for because doing 1,000 less DPS in raid is
Is not
not
a
something
thing.
that lets you play in the raid, right?
Yeah.
And or at least even there, like that'll be really unfun for you. And so I think that hopefully if they're looking at this in a new way, the faction thing is on along similar lines where it's like, look, there are people that engage with this game for a lot of different reasons, and in fact, multiple different reasons in a lot of cases. But when we force them to choose these other reasons versus damage number, then we actually just kill that other part of the game.
I think that it's one of those things that players don't want to be like super unoptimized. There's definitely a level. It's a sliding scale with like how much you're willing to give up. I mean, like for a long time, I think that covenants were equated to racials during the beta cycle, if you remember, and
Right.
obviously that's very like silly to look at it in retrospect. But covenants were related to racials because racials, I think, are Blizzard's like high point for you can select a race, but ultimately the choice isn't going to impact your decision by realistically that much
Right.
outside of just fantasy.
And they don't mind the fact that like top 100 guilds care about race, and other than that, like they're fine with that, right?
Do you
But
care
then
about
below that,
race?
it really doesn't matter.
Do you
Yeah,
care
I mean,
about
I've
race?
swapped a couple times. There's goblin necessary for some classes and specs, and
Okay.
if there's like half a percent of DPS, I will swap for it. But like, it's not something where everybody in my guild does, and it's certainly not something where everybody in like a World 1000 guild would do it, right? Or a World 2000 guild. But if you look at the warlocks in a World 2000 guild, I will bet you all of my money that they are playing Night Fae, and they're
Yeah,
not playing
this
like Venthyr or Destro, which probably fits the warlock fantasy better.
yeah, exactly. None of them are going to be playing that for fantasy, but they may all be playing different races. And it's like
Right, exactly.
I was high mountain torn whenever it was a damage loss for like a long time. Obviously, it's I had to swap this tier because it was a lot of damage for me personally. But at the same time, more often than not, I think racials are in a pretty good spot where you're able to balance that level of fantasy. And I think that I just hope that they are going to make a lot of different things. They don't specifically talk about it here, but I think that just a lot of the playability metrics sometimes would get completely clogged up with some of the systems that they were designing, specifically like shards of domination. Like that system is so like Corthia. Actually, Corthia wasn't really that bad. I think renown farming, I think, would probably be another big one. And just like covenant swapping, I think that those would be the big ones from this expansion. In expansions past, it would be like account wide essences. It took literally forever to get those, right? Or just like essence grinding in general. Corruption resistance also was a long time before you got corruption resistance catch up. Legion legendaries, it took us a while to get there. I think that they talked a lot about the philosophy that is changing and trying to make alts more playable and try to empower the player to play a game in the way that they necessarily want.
Yeah,
I think
so
it's I think it's very idealistic, and I hope that they stick to it. I'm not super convinced with what they've done in the past, though.
right. The thing is that this doesn't represent new rhetoric from Blizzard, right? Like they have said
Yeah,
like five times in the last 4 years they've talked about how they're going to be more receptive to feedback this time, right? And so what we're looking for really is like, I mean, really just actions at this point that will matter and not so much words. But it is worth noting that these words here are the same ones we've heard before, right? And in fact, there are some elements of what they're talking about here that I feel are them learning the wrong lesson potentially, or could be them learning the wrong lesson. The stuff about Ian saying that they need to do a better job of not just like changing what they're doing based on feedback, but communicating that they're listening and they understand and they're choosing to go a different way. I feel like that wasn't a weakness at all of the Shadowlands design experience. We got multiple posts about how the players were wrong about conduit energy and about covenants and everything, and they understood where we were coming from, but they're choosing to go a different way, right? And I think what we actually need is a process by which whatever the next conduit energy they come up with and get a lot of feedback about, they don't actually end up implementing it anyways for a year.
I wonder what would happen if they started the design process in the opposite direction, where they opened up everything and then they were like, okay, so maybe now restricting it would be better for like game design. I just wonder. Obviously, it would be a very jarring experience to play something super open.
I mean, I think it's a natural progression to go from like time gated or restrictive features that then open up more over time. I think that that's natural and healthy. It's just like the extent to which they start restricted is, and the length of time that they're restricted for is too high. Like if we came into this expansion And you sort of did this in Legion, right? Where it's like you come into the expansion, and for the first patch, you're gated, and then like 2 months into the first patch, you've unlocked the ability to swap to everything. I don't think anybody would have had a problem with that, right? Like, say you pick your covenant, you have that covenant as a permanent choice that you can't swap, and then
Yeah.
like in a month you get to unlock an embassy and you get to start earning the ability to use the other covenant abilities, right? And it's like a gameplay swap, but it's never a flavor swap. You're always hard locked flavor wise to whatever covenant you picked. Like, I think that would have not been a problem at all. And that first month of like a choice that is restrictive for a short time at the start of a patch, or the time gates that they have, right? Like grinding your legendary in Torghast during the first month of patch 9.1 was fine, I think, right? Where it's like,
It
okay,
was okay.
yeah, exactly.
It was
You get it
new.
up
It
to
was new
49.
content. It is fine.
Well, and like powering up over the first month of a patch feels good, but then returning to the game or playing a new alt 5 months into the patch and seeing that same length of time gate in front of you is not fine, right? That's where it's a case of like, do I really want to play this alt? Do I really want to play this patch if I'm a returning
Do
player?
it,
And the answer is usually like, no.
yeah. So I'm sure you get this a lot in your chat. People asking like, should I come back in this patch? And I'm like, well, I would expect to not get caught up to full, but if you're trying to set yourself up for next patch, yeah, maybe you could come back now.
Yeah, it's a tough question because the I really want the answer to be yes, right? Like I have a lot of fun in
I
this
like
game,
WoW.
right? And I
Yeah.
want people to play the game more, but then I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, if I was just joining the game, particularly like if I was joining and I didn't have a guild to like carry a character through stuff, I'm just looking at like the entirety of this patch, it's going to be scuffed for you, right? The
Yeah.
domination system as well. We don't talk about that enough when we're talking about this article, but like the domination chart system is just the perfect epitome of what on earth are they
Bad.
up to, right? What is
Bad.
happening here?
No, no. And was there any positive feedback on the domination chart system either? I mean, I think it's just another thing where it's just like there was like overtly negative feedback. We're like, we don't want this. Wait, hold on.
Well, I think in some cases it's a case of like design hubris, right? Where they kind of like anticipate what some of the complaints are going to be and then rationalize why that's wrong, and the argument has already happened in their heads, and then they launch the feature and people will have those complaints and they're like, yeah, we expected this. This wasn't a surprise to us. That line is like in the Ian interview. It's like, it wasn't a surprise to us that players wanted the covenant system to be different for these reasons, but we planned to keep going forward with it anyways, and we went forward with it. And
it's hard because like I mean even you and I as like content creators, sometimes we'll get feedback and we're like, should we really listen to this feedback? Is it something that's like super valid, or is it something
right.
that it's just like our most hardcore fans want this specific thing, and it's just like what realistically is something that is the most interesting content to make?
Yeah, I mean, like, you're gonna make a game or content or whatever that has changes that some people don't like, right?
Yeah, always.
Like that doesn't mean you shouldn't make those things, but I feel like they've come into most of the feedback cycles. Like, when is the last time that a feature really changed based on feedback in a beta cycle in World of Warcraft to a system that wasn't like worse? And also like
Dude,
the conduit energy was a case of like they iterated on that system 3 times in beta. Each time people were like, wait, no, this is worse than the last time, and so it eventually launched that way.
to a major system, it is the answer is almost no. Like
Right.
they will change like minor things. Like for example, they completely reworked a lot of the Trash and Plague Fall and redid it like 3 times. I would almost describe that as like small potatoes in the grand scheme of like the full game, right? If they completely went in and reworked, not retuned, but just like reworked how Covenant specific dungeon buffs work, I would say that is like a major change, and that never got
Right.
changed.
Yeah, that would have been good.
The Covenants themselves also never got changed. Conduit energy, I mean, got changed for the worse, not necessarily the better. Soulbinds were always kind of just meh. You know?
Yeah, and to some extent, like they're just gonna have their design choices that are not open for discussion, and like not, it's too late to change them even by the time they announce the game. But like, I don't know, like what is going to be the process by which the next conduit energy doesn't happen this way is my question. Because to me, it seems like a lot of what they're changing is they're changing how they'll be able to communicate to us and like explain to us why it's coming out that way. But I just don't. I have not seen that to be a problem. Like I've read multiple dissertations of extremely bad logic explaining why conduit energy needs to exist, and none of them were right. But all of them were enough to make it go into the game.
Yeah, and then they walk it back and eventually,
Right,
right?
more than a year in, which is the that's the kind of
The
the
meme.
cynical look at this is right is that every expansion is the same in that it starts out with these things that players don't want to see, and then in the point 2 patch or in the point 1.5 patch, they eventually make the changes that
Yeah,
have been suggested in beta, right? And so like we are seeing
yep.
that process once again, and they're promising not to do it again, which in and of itself is part of the process, right? Part of the process, that cycle
We're listening to
meme
feedback.
is that they say they're listening to feedback and they're going to do it differently next time. So, obviously I would love for them to listen to feedback and do it differently next time, but them saying they're going to do that
Yeah.
has not correlated with them actually doing it in the past.
All right. Before we jump into the community council stuff and talk about some of that and like what that necessarily means in relationship to the interview, do you want to talk about anything left in this interview? The toxicity, combating toxicity, 9.1.5 coming from the hackathon, or we already talked about this one. But,
Yeah, I mean,
combat
9.1.5
toxicity.
has a suite of features that I think this is sweet, not SWEET, but SUITE, although it is kind of both. There are some features in 9.1.5 that I think are like really, really nice
Really
little
sweet.
quality. Yeah, exactly. It's a sweet suite of features that like the male icon on your character in character select screen. Some of that stuff is just like, I mean, those are inspired good changes. And I'm glad that they're
Making bosses soloable that were not previously soloable.
oh yeah, although apparently they kind of scuffed a lot, a lot of that. It's like they got Fallen Avatar, but they forgot to change KJ at all.
KJ got changed.
Do you
KJ
know
got changed.
Nightbane and Karazhan now the RP because of the rescaling? Medivh one shots the image, and so the RP doesn't happen, and Nightbane can't spawn.
Oh, no, I
Yeah,
didn't
so
know
there,
that. But anyways, it's good intentions.
it's
I think
yeah,
that
and I'm
it's
sure that they'll cover some more of these things. I think it's good to make the game more soloable for sure for legacy content, since we've decided that's what legacy content is good for.
these aren't like oh, it
None of
has to
it's
get
major,
fixed.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it has to get fixed today. But it's like in like a long term grand scope of the game. Like okay, yeah, it's good stuff. As for the
Yeah,
toxicity stuff, I think like account wide ignoring of
that should have been here for
characters.
years. Yeah.
I don't think that anybody's ever going to complain about the toxicity stuff. I think it's just like what you
Well,
can say is
there's
like
some elements that are a lot of this interview also includes some of the controversial discussion around the changing of quests and things, which a
yeah,
lot of people do disagree with, but I'm not really one of them. I think it's fine and not something that will negatively impact the game. But
it's a good thing
having mentioned
ultimately.
that, we've already summoned some hordes of commenters.
All right, let's move on
Yeah.
before we hit a hornet's nest a little bit harder. All right, talking about the community council a bit. So like you were saying, I think that one of the things that was actually super important is just like this is part of the process, right? Where they're like, oh, we're listening to feedback. Oh, then they make a Discord channel or whatever, right? Or there have been multiple private forums that have been leaked in the past where it's been
Yeah, no,
community members inside of private forums that give feedback, and then the developers are like, I don't care.
I mean, in the past there was in the like ghost crawler days, right? There was a private forum that theory crafters or whatever were in that
Uh,
was useful, right? It was good. Like
yeah,
and then it stopped being good, and nothing changed about the composition of the forum or the people that were in it, right? No, any of that stuff changed. What changed was whether Blizzard was intending to listen to it and what their philosophy was, right? So in the same way, this community council of getting some people together, like if it is not particularly relevant for whether we're going to see more devs listening to feedback, because what matters is whether they intend to listen to feedback. If they do intend to listen to feedback and they've decided that this is a better way to collect that feedback and gather it in one place and not be overwhelmed by a horde of voices, and
yes.
make sure that it's a place full of opinions that are well constructed and thought out, and not as full of like trolls and stuff, then this is going to be a great step towards that. But the crucial thing there is not the creation of this forum, it's the changing of that mindset. And similarly, if the mindset hasn't changed and this is just a move to generate PR to better communicate the decisions they've made that are locked in, set in stone, then this also is not going to help. So the existence of this council and whether it like who is in it, all that stuff, it's really not as important as just what actually they are planning to do, and we can't know that because they say the same thing whether or not they actually plan to listen to feedback.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is like you have a little bit more of a cynical view of it. I'm a little bit more optimistic, I think, in the sense of like, yeah, this is actually all of this stuff feels really good if they. And here's like the different spin on it. If they intend to actually use it, and then it's just like I feel like it will all be like very positively received if it is just taken at face value and done correctly. I think the problem is just like you said, like you keep reiterating on, it has not been done correctly in the past, and then it just always gets dropped, and then we end up in this like loop where it's like, I've seen this one. Oh, this is. I think that there have been 2 iterations of private forums from what I understand now, that completely continue to get like blown up, and then it just like dropped. And so this is effectively the 3rd iteration of a private forum where there have been stories where developers have been super combative to changes and being like, I don't understand why the players want this, and then whenever they get told, they're like, okay, I don't care, kind of thing. And it's just like, oh no, I hope that's not like what, like, obviously it's all hearsay, right? It's all secondhand.
Right.
So
I mean, I'm a little bit more optimistic about how well private forums can work. Like, I think they can be a great tool
sure.
for that. Like, and they were in the past, right? The mop design time is one of the times that people talk about when the forums were really being used for that kind of purpose. But yeah, crucially, it's just like whether or not there's a forum doesn't really matter as much as like whether the devs are intending to use it or to not really, right?
Okay, so both you, so something you said at the beginning of this video, but I think both you and I have applied for this community forum. You said something interesting of like you don't think that you should be on it. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I just don't think they should have people that are like that have, they're super famous, right? They have a big following of people, because I don't think that
What a
it should
flex.
turn into like it's hard, right? Just when you're so famous. But I think that they shouldn't. I think they shouldn't have people that are like making little videos or streams or something that's already reaching a lot of people, right? Like if you think about those sorts of people in the community, I think their ideas are already generally pretty well heard. And I think even if they're not in the council, there's a very good chance that some of the people in the council will be consuming their content and will if they think their perspectives are valuable. You probably will have multiple people taking the talking points from their newest video or whatever and putting them in that forum. But I don't think it should turn into like these 2 content creators they have these different takes in the community council, and they're I feel like that could turn pretty easily into like
Oh
a
yeah.
popularity contest slash type thing, and the devs end up having to kind of weigh in on one side or another, or like what ends up happening gets blamed on one
Oh.
content creator versus another, right? Which already happens and is already it's already something that can be quite frustrating, but I think it would even more
Okay.
happen there. So I think they shouldn't add any content creators to the list, but if they're gonna add some, I'd like to be one of them.
Say about that. I think that it's like you and I both have avenues for giving feedback, whether it be through
The
private
super
methods or
famous part,
MDI,
yeah.
or the super famous part, the MDI methods or whatever else, right? And it's just like, I mean, ultimately, if we feel strongly about something, we'll just make a video, like you said. We'll make a video. I
Right,
think that
exactly.
I do think that if it became a popularity contest, then it would definitely be a problem. It's like jurors not being like they're not supposed to read publications about the trials that they're seated on
Right.
before they like just come to a conclusion or whatever, right? And it's just due to the fact that they don't want their opinions swayed one way or the other with biased information. I think that it's like,
Yeah.
obviously, if it became a popularity contest, it would be just a shit show.
I mean,
It would be good content.
you in particular just gotta hate the idea of a popularity contest, right?
So hard to just be not popular. I sit
Oh,
at the
no.
gamer table at lunch, bro. You don't get it. You don't get it. You get to sit with all the cool kids, and I sit with the gamers. Okay. Another thing that was brought to our attention, and by brought to our attention, I mean tweeted out that we read, was this interesting tweet from our friend on Mac Jack. And it says, for real though, with this council, they need to give people code names that they can choose to publicize or not. Unpopular posters getting harassed / flamed for certain members, or certain members getting influenced by others posting about X topics should be a real concern.
Right. That's sort of a similar line of concern to mine about influencers being in there, right? Like, especially in that world, could you imagine just like, you know, some 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 person without a following and like
The person with a
I don't know,
following.
some person with 100,000 followers or whatever end up being on opposite sides of an issue in that forum, and then Blizzard goes the way of the person without the following. Like, could you imagine how many, depending on what kind of community the the person was cultivating, but even if they try really hard to not have like a toxic community, they're gonna have some rabid so-called fans that harass that person. I imagine. So I do think it's a legitimate concern, particularly if there are influencers in the forum. But even if not, yeah, I mean, I think an option for anonymity does make some sense. I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like how they construct it. They have to be careful and make sure that they're
Okay.
not inviting criticism. And in fact, it's important if they are looking to get, you know, a good perspective. Like they are going to bias their sample if they have people worried about saying unpopular opinions because, or opinions they expect will be unpopular because of a worry about, you know,
So, I mean, that's just an
harassment.
issue. That's just an issue of it all being public, right? I think that's something that we didn't explicitly state, but this is a public forum, right?
Sort of, yeah. It's publicly. Some of it is publicly visible. Some of it is private. Even there, if you look, like
Yeah,
there are also supposed to be some parts of it that are, but a lot of the discussion is supposed to happen in a place where only the council members and Blizz devs can post, but everybody can view. Which kind of good news for us. It means that
that's
any of those weeks where we're without a topic, we can just take a look at the newest blue post from the community forum. You know, make some videos about that. Easy.
yoink. Don't mind if I do. But like, it's just one of those things that it opens. It's like a real Pandora's box where it's like so open from developers and community members that sure they're signing up for this, but do they really know what they're signing up for? Like, obviously they're influence, like if there are influencers on there, the influencers kind of understand what they're signing up for. We kind of understand that there's going to be some level of hate versus praise that we're going to be
Yeah,
getting regardless of what's happening, like if you and I are signing up for it. But like there's a lot of casual povs that they want, there's a lot of like normal person povs that they want, that won't necessarily understand what they are realistically getting themselves into, especially if negative rhetoric starts to be presented about their position and they're called names online potentially.
right. I mean, like imagine being in that forum and being like a pro covenant swap or pro covenant locking, right?
I'm making a video about you. I'm making a video
Right.
about you.
Like you effectively have like all of the content creators, all the high end content creators making videos, even if they're not mentioning you in particular, they're, you know, taking your talking points or whatever, or all of them are on the opposite side of
And
the issue as you, and like
rebuttaling your points even
right.
if they're not specifically naming you.
Yeah, and well, and so like, you know, then you go into that, like if people go into that community forum, right, and they see like 99 high end raiders on one side and like, you know, some casual players on the other side. Like I would be worried about being one of those players for sure, and I would also be worried if I was Blizzard about like, is this going to mean those people just don't talk, right? And that
Yeah.
also means that they're just not collecting the diversity of perspectives they're looking for.
Just going through some of the stuff that's on this forum. If you want, you can always sign up. It talks about name or alias. I personally put like my own name, but
Yeah, I mean,
like
like
the
you could
alias.
put an anonymous thing in there, but I mean, it's kind of not really discussed at all, right? Like whether any of this stuff, right? Like most people are just going to assume that's a name field, and they're going to put their character name or whatever their username.
Exactly. I think that one of the most interesting points, and the reason I started clicking through this forum, is like, what are the World of Warcraft areas you're most experienced in? And they give you like a lot, right? And then they hit you with the other box, and you can. There's a lot of things that you can say that you're like super experienced in, or have like what is effectively a mastery of, whether it be raiding, Mythic Plus, PvP, and like a bunch of different
I don't
stuff.
even think it's necessarily so much about mastery so much as like what you enjoy. Like I don't even think you have to be an expert on these things. And I think they're looking for a lot of like somebody who does this content but isn't, you know, super, like they're not
Okay.
like theory crafters so much as
Well,
like I think they also want the casual
exactly.
perspectives on all those things. But yeah, there's a
And look
lot
at
of different
this.
categories.
Which of these answers describes your playstyle best? And it's casual, hardcore, and cutting edge. And I think that they are looking for at least a very diverse uh, level of engagement from like who they are getting, just like some perspectives from.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's naturally you're the relative to the player base, you're going to have a way higher proportion of people that are like hardcore or cutting edge applying to this council. So they will probably do some like they'll probably be looking for some good representatives from that, checking that casual box.
Yeah. I'm
authentically,
casual.
of course.
I'm casual.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
In the meantime, I think that's gonna be it for us today. I think that ultimately, like Brenda said, I think that just a summary, all these things are good if they really stick to them. Hopefully, it makes the game better long term because I think that you and I are both passionate for the game and love the game a lot, right?
Yeah, fundamentally, like I mean, the raid fights in particular have been so great. With the second to last bosses, the last two tiers being big exceptions, but other than that, they've been really good for the past like 5 years, and so I love that part of the game. But it does feel like the other stuff around the game has uh, taken a little bit of a turn that hopefully they're looking to change, and I'm glad they're saying they're looking to change it. But you got to discount it because they've said that a lot before.
All right. In the meantime, do you have more of a cynical view, an optimistic view? What kind of view do you have on this?
Yeah, let us know in the comments below, of course.
And we will
Very
see you
interested to
guys.
hear a variety of perspectives, much like Blizzard.
Yes, and we will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.